There are a few ways to ruin breakfast, and having a plasma grenade crash through the window is somewhere between spilling coffee on yourself and choking to death on a muffin. For Zara Greaves, it was just another Tuesday. One moment she was arguing with her mother over political protocols, and the next, she was ducking flying shards of reinforced glass while armored raiders stormed the room screaming for her by name. And somewhere in the back of her mind, as she hit the ground and covered her head, all she could think was, finally, something interesting. The embassy's security system screamed to life, blaring alarms that clashed horribly with the raiders' shouted orders. Zara's mother, Eliana Greaves, one of Earth's highest-ranking diplomats, stood frozen with a look of outrage, not fear, clutching her communicator and yelling into it for backup that was clearly going to be too late. Zara could see it all play out with a weird, distant clarity, the polished marble floor reflecting the red flashes of gunfire, the expensive art on the walls riddled with plasma burns, the pitifully slow response of the bodyguards who were supposed to be the best in the galaxy. They weren't here for politics. They were here for her. She knew it in her gut even before one of the raiders barked her full name into the comms, confirming her worst suspicion. A huge figure in blood-red armor barreled toward her, and instinct took over. Zara grabbed the nearest thing she could, a breakfast chair, and smashed it over his helmet. The chair disintegrated. He didn't even blink. 2 seconds later she was in cuffs, being dragged through smoke and chaos, with her mother's voice fading into the distance, still demanding, still commanding, still helpless. Zara couldn't help but smirk a little through the panic. If Mom could see her now, kidnapped like some common princess in a fairy tale. The thought almost made her laugh, except the raider punched her in the stomach before she got the chance. They tossed her into a ship that reeked of sweat and engine grease. As the engines roared to life and the Earth Embassy shrank below, Zara struggled against her restraints, twisting and cursing under her breath. Across from her, slumped against the metal wall, was a crate marked with all kinds of warning signs she didn't understand. Something about biohazard, containment, ancient tech, and something else. Something that shimmered in and out of her vision like a mirage. She wasn't alone in noticing it. One of the raiders, younger and cockier than the rest, kicked the crate lightly with his boot and laughed. "Bet it's just some dusty old museum junk," he said, reaching out to yank it open. Zara didn't even have time to scream a warning before the crate exploded with a blast of icy wind and a sound like 1,000 whispered curses. The raider who touched it dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Shadows poured from the broken crate, thick and oily and wrong, coiling like snakes before snapping into the shape of a man. A man in ancient armor, his eyes burning like 2 dying stars, looked directly at Zara. His face was both human and monstrous, covered in cracks like shattered porcelain, and when he spoke, his voice scraped against her skull. "You," he said, pointing a bony finger. "You are my key." Every raider in the ship tried to shoot him at once. It was pathetic. Their plasma bolts passed through him like smoke. The ghost, because that was the only word for what he was, barely even moved. He just smiled a terrible smile, and whispered a word Zara didn't recognize. The raiders collapsed one by one, convulsing, their weapons clattering uselessly to the floor. The ship lurched wildly as its pilot, apparently not dead yet, tried to make an emergency landing. Panels sparked, gravity faltered, and Zara was thrown against the wall hard enough to see stars. When she looked up, the ghost was standing over her, reaching out. "Touch me and you die," she snapped automatically, even though terror choked her throat. The ghost chuckled, low and dry. "You carry my blood. You carry my curse. There is no escape." The ship slammed into something, screeching metal and roaring engines, and everything went black. When she came to, the world was silent except for the ticking of cooling metal. The ship had crash-landed in the middle of what looked like an abandoned industrial zone, towering rusted structures under a cold alien sky. She was still alive. Somehow. Her restraints were broken. Somehow. The ghost was sitting cross-legged in front of her like he was meditating. Somehow. Zara pushed herself upright, every muscle screaming, and glared at him. Great. A kidnapping, a crash landing, And now I'm possessed by some dead psychopath. Best day ever. The ghost opened one eye and smiled grimly. You have no idea. Sirens wailed in the distance. Earth forces, probably tracking the crash. Zara staggered to her feet. She had two options. Run and hope she could outrun a ghost, not likely. Or figure out a way to survive long enough to get this nightmare under control. Fine, she said, rolling her eyes. You want me? You're stuck with me. But you do what I say, got it? No more random killing. No creepy possession. No, whatever it is you're thinking right now. The ghost rose to his feet effortlessly. Terms accepted. For now. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Zara squared her shoulders, shoved her fear deep down where it couldn't get in the way, and started limping toward the nearest structure, the ghost following a few steps behind her like a particularly malevolent shadow. Somewhere inside the twisted wreckage of the ship, a communicator crackled to life. Eliana Greaves' voice cut through the static, cold and commanding. Bring her back. At any cost. Zara didn't hear it. She had no idea yet how far her mother would go. Or that the kidnapping was only the beginning. The galaxy was about to learn that when you kidnap a diplomat's daughter, you don't just start a war. You unleash something worse. The thing about hauling around a murderous ghost like unwanted luggage was that it made stealth missions impossible. Zara tried creeping through the ruins, sticking to the shadows, her instincts sharp from years of living under political scrutiny. But the ghost, Kale, he finally called himself, had the subtlety of a wrecking ball. Every few minutes he would hum some ancient war song or knock over piles of debris without even trying. At one point he tried to assist by vaporizing a trio of scavengers with an invisible blade made from pure malice. Zara barely stopped him by throwing a rock through his head, which only made him laugh that hollow, awful laugh of his. Maybe you should just, float quietly behind me like a normal ghost, she hissed after the fifth near-death encounter. Kale gave her a wounded look, like she had insulted his honor, and muttered something about honest conquest requiring a good entrance. Zara ignored him. If she stopped to argue every time he did something insane, she would never get anywhere. The plan, such as it was, involved getting off this cursed planet and putting as much distance between herself and Earth politics as possible. That meant finding a ship. Preferably one that wasn't on fire, full of ghosts, or guarded by people who wanted her dead. Which was easier said than done, because word had already spread about the crash. Bounty hunters, scavengers, and mercenaries were converging on the crash site like vultures to a dying animal. Zara had barely walked 2 kilometers when the first one found her. The man was tall, skinny, and smelled like burned plastic. He wore patched-together armor and had a gun bigger than Zara's torso slung lazily across his back. He spotted her limping along the cracked road and grinned like he had just won the Galactic lottery. Well, he drawled, raising his gun. Looks like I'm getting that payday after all. Zara considered her options. Fight? She had no weapon. Run? She was half dead and exhausted. Talk? That might work, if she could stall long enough. Big mistake, she said, trying to channel her mother's icy confidence. You're not hunting a girl. You're hunting a ghost. He laughed and took a step forward, and then Kale materialized behind him, silent as death. Before the bounty hunter could even turn around, Kale drove a spectral hand into his chest. The man gasped, twitched, and crumpled without a sound. Zara winced. Subtle. Really subtle. Kale shrugged. He was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. The body hit the ground with a wet thump. Zara searched it quickly and found a small comlink. She didn't dare use it yet, it would only broadcast her location. But it might come in handy later. They kept moving, Kale occasionally pointing out dangers Zara couldn't even see, like invisible mines and tripwires. He was, she had to admit, weirdly useful. In an awful, terrifying way. It was like having a hyper-intelligent death alarm constantly whispering worst-case scenarios in her ear. By the time they reached the nearest spaceport, a junkyard-turned-pirate hub called Dust Point, Zara was ready to collapse. Dust Point wasn't much to look at, just a sprawl of battered ships, makeshift markets, and shady characters who would sell you a kidney or steal one, depending on how you looked at them. It reeked of oil, sweat, and desperation. Perfect. Zara ducked into the shadows and scanned the crowd. She needed a ship. Preferably one captained by someone desperate or stupid enough not to ask questions. That was when she saw him. Captain Jax Voller was leaning against a half-broken speeder, arguing animatedly with a tiny spherical robot that kept shocking him with electricity. He looked exactly like the kind of disaster Zara needed. His jacket was 3 sizes too big, his boots didn't match, and his ship, a battered freighter named the Reckless Hope, looked like it might fall apart if someone sneezed too hard. Zara approached cautiously. Jax noticed her and immediately grinned, flashing teeth that were too white to be natural. "Well, hey there, Trouble. You look like someone who needs a ride." Zara didn't smile. "I have credits. I need off-world now." Jax shrugged. "Credits are credits. Reckless Hope leaves in 30 minutes, with or without passengers." Cale whispered in her ear, his voice colder than space. "He smells of cowardice and bad luck." "Perfect," Zara muttered, ignoring Cale. She climbed aboard the freighter without another word. The inside was somehow worse than the outside. Exposed wires dangled from the ceiling. Half the panels were missing. Something in the ventilation ducts was either alive or had been alive recently. Zara made a note to not ask too many questions. 30 minutes later, with engines screaming in protest, Reckless Hope blasted out of Dust Point. Zara sagged into a rickety chair and let herself breathe for the first time in hours. It didn't last. The ship's proximity alarms went off almost immediately. Jack swore and hammered buttons at random. We've got company," he announced brightly. "Looks like several raider ships. Heavily armed. Very unfriendly." Zara cursed. Of course they had tracked her. Of course they had backup. Jax yanked the controls hard, sending the ship into a stomach-churning dive. "Hope you're not prone to motion sickness," he yelled. Zara gripped the armrests and tried not to scream. Cale, standing perfectly balanced despite the insane maneuvers, looked almost bored. "They will board us," he said calmly. "They will tear the ship apart. You will die screaming." "Wow, thanks for the pep talk," Zara snapped. Jack spun the ship again, narrowly missing a barrage of plasma fire. "Got any bright ideas, mystery girl?" Zara closed her eyes, took a breath, and said the stupidest thing she had ever said. "Let the ghost drive." There was a long pause. Even Cale looked surprised. "You cannot be serious," Cale said slowly. "Dead serious," she shot back. Jax threw up his hands. "I officially regret everything about today." Cale drifted toward the controls, placed his hands over Jax's, and in a blur of unnatural movement, the Reckless Hope turned into a phantom streak of light. It dodged, weaved, and outmaneuvered ships 3 times its size like it had a mind of its own. Plasma bolts missed by inches. Enemy ships collided with each other trying to chase them. It was chaos, it was insane, and somehow, it worked. They broke through the blockade and punched into hyperspace, the stars stretching into lines of light. When it was over, Zara slumped back, heart hammering, muscles shaking. Jax turned around, pale and sweating. "Okay. One rule. No more haunted driving lessons. Ever." Cale simply smiled that terrifying smile. Zara just laughed, a wild, giddy sound that startled even herself. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being protected by Earth's rules or her mother's armies. She was free. Free, and completely, utterly doomed. Dust Point had been bad, but the pirate colony on Erebos 9 made it look like a luxury resort. As the Reckless Hope descended into the dense, choking atmosphere, Zara could already see the neon signs flickering weakly between rusted-out towers and blackened ruins. Erebos 9 was where desperate people went when nowhere else would take them, and judging by the smell leaking into the cockpit, it was also where hygiene had gone to die. Jax landed the ship with a bone-jarring thud that knocked loose a panel from the ceiling. It clattered to the floor between them, and he just grinned like it was normal. Zara figured it probably was. Cale stood silently behind her, as he always did now, his presence like a cold shadow pressed against her spine. He had been oddly quiet since the escape, and that silence was somehow worse than his usual ominous commentary. Zara shot a glance at him, but he just nodded toward the hatch. Time to move. Time to act like they belong. They stepped into the chaos of the colony. The streets were a writhing mass of beings from every known system, plus a few Zara was pretty sure didn't exist on any official registry. Merchants hawked illegal tech from open stalls. Gangs lounged in alleys, their weapons obvious and ready. Every few meters a crude poster fluttered against the wall, wanted, Zara Greaves, reward negotiable. Her face stared back at her with an expression of stubborn defiance. They had circulated her bounty faster than she thought possible. Which meant they had to move even faster. Jax led the way through the crowded, filthy streets with the easy swagger of a man too dumb to realize he was in danger, or too experienced to care. Zara kept close behind, one hand on the small blaster she had lifted from a corpse back at the crash site. Cale drifted along, invisible to everyone but her, eyes sweeping the crowd for threats she couldn't even perceive. They reached a grimy cantina called the Hollow Void, which was a generous name considering it was mostly just a pit in the ground with a few tables and a leaking roof. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of fermented despair. A dozen sets of suspicious eyes tracked them as they entered. Zara felt Cale tense beside her, a coiled serpent ready to strike at the first sign of trouble. They found a table near the back, under a broken light that flickered in and out. Jax leaned in, keeping his voice low. "I know a guy," he said. "Name's Cray. He deals in fast ships and no questions. Only problem is, he's also a massive scumbag who would sell his own grandmother for a decent sandwich." "Sounds charming," Zara muttered. "Let's get it over with." Cray arrived 10 minutes later, waddling toward them with the smug grin of someone who thought he controlled the room. His bodyguards flanked him, their armor patched and mismatched, their weapons very real and very loaded. "You're a hard girl to miss," Cray said, sliding into the booth opposite Zara. "Half the colony's looking for you. What's it worth to you to stay hidden?" Zara met his gaze without flinching. "Name your price." Cray's grin widened. "Not credits, sweetheart. Information. Names. Secrets. Things your fancy Earth friends don't want floating around." Zara stiffened. She could practically feel Cale bristling beside her. They had known it wouldn't be cheap, but trading state secrets was a line she hadn't planned to cross. Not yet. Before she could answer, Cale leaned forward, still invisible to Cray but somehow making the air grow colder. "You will not survive betrayal," Cale whispered in a voice only Zara could hear. Jax cleared his throat awkwardly. "Maybe we negotiate a little first? You know, warm up the room before we threaten to destroy people's souls." Zara forced a smile. "Fine. One secret. Small. Then you help us." Cray considered, then nodded. Zara leaned in and whispered a carefully selected piece of low-grade intelligence into his ear. Just enough to buy their escape without selling her soul completely. Cray's eyes gleamed with greed, and he snapped his fingers at one of his guards. "Deal," he said. "Dock 9. Be there in an hour. Fast ship, clean papers. But if you cross me..." He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. They left the hollow void as discreetly as possible, but Zara could already feel the shift in the crowd. Eyes following. Whispers starting. Someone had recognized her, or maybe Cray had already sold them out. They didn't even make it halfway to the docks before the ambush hit. A dozen bounty hunters burst from alleyways and rooftops, plasma rifles leveled, shouting orders Zara didn't bother trying to understand. She dove for cover behind a broken hovercar, dragging Jax with her. Cale materialized fully now, roaring with ancient fury, his form flickering between solid and ghostly as he hurled himself at their attackers. It was chaos. Screaming, blaster fire, the crackle of energy weapons. Kale tore through the bounty hunters like a storm, intangible one moment and horrifyingly solid the next. Zara fired wildly from cover, managing to drop 2 enemies before her blaster overheated and sputtered uselessly. Jax, to his credit, fought back too, using dirty street fighting tricks Zara suspected he had learned in even dirtier places. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Zara's heart pounded against her ribs as she realized they weren't going to make it. Not this time. Kale reappeared beside her, blood smeared and grinning. "Say the word," he said, "and I will unleash them." Zara didn't know what he meant by them. She didn't want to know. But she also didn't want to die here, face down in a gutter on a backwater colony. "Do it," she said, teeth clenched. Kale raised his arms and shouted a word in a language that twisted the air itself. The shadows around them deepened, thickened, and from them emerged shapes. Figures in ancient armor, wielding weapons that crackled with dark energy. Kale hadn't been alone. He had an army. The bounty hunters froze in terror. One fired a shot that passed straight through a ghostly soldier. Another dropped his weapon and bolted. The rest followed seconds later, tripping over each other in their panic. Zara stared at the spectral army swirling around her, heart hammering. Kale turned to her with a look of savage pride. "You are no longer a fugitive," he said. "You are a general." Jax peeked out from behind the wrecked hovercar, looking at the ghosts, then at Zara. "Next time," he said weakly. "Maybe we just bribe someone." Zara couldn't help it. She laughed. A short, sharp, slightly hysterical sound. They had survived. For now. But Zara knew it wasn't over. Not even close. They didn't have long. Kale's army of ghost soldiers had scattered the bounty hunters, but Zara knew that news traveled faster than fear on places like Erebos 9. Every surviving pair of eyes would be transmitting what they saw, a girl commanding an army of the dead. It would take minutes, maybe less, before the wrong people came crashing down on them. She and Jax sprinted toward Dock 9, Kale and a few remaining phantoms keeping pace with eerie silence. They reached the promised ship, a sleek black cruiser that looked suspiciously well-maintained compared to the rest of the junkyard. Jax whistled under his breath and ran a quick systems check while Zara kept watch, pulse racing, ready to shoot anything that moved. Just as the engines flared to life and they prepared for a quick takeoff, a new presence surged into Zara's mind. Not Kale's cold burn. This was something else. Familiar. Sharp. Unforgiving. Her communicator, which she had forgotten even existed until now, crackled to life. "Zara Greaves. This is your mother. Stand down immediately and surrender yourself to Earth Authority. You have no idea what you are playing with." Zara's hands tightened into fists. Of course it was her mother. Of course Eliana Greaves had found a way to hijack even this moment of almost freedom. Before she could respond, Kale stepped forward, his form becoming more solid, more dangerous. "She lied to you," he said in a voice that vibrated through the ship's metal frame. "She always knew. She was always part of it." Zara shook her head, trying to clear the buzzing from her ears. "What are you talking about?" Kale moved closer, his eyes burning brighter than ever. "The vault. The artifact. Your kidnapping. All of it orchestrated. You were not a casualty. You were the weapon." Zara staggered back a step, her mind reeling. "No. No, that's insane. My mother would never." Jax cut in, urgency sharpening his tone. Hate to break up the existential crisis, but we've got incoming. Big ones. Military grade." Zara turned, seeing the approaching Earth Authority cruisers descending like vultures. She realized, with a sick twist in her gut, that they weren't coming to rescue her. They were coming to claim her. And if she resisted, they would bury her with the rest of this rotten colony. Eliana's voice crackled through the calm again, almost tender now. "Surrender, Zara. You don't have to fight. Come home and we can fix this. We can make it right." Zara laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the cold air. "Fix this." Like she was a broken tool, not a daughter. "No," Zara said aloud, her voice steady. I'm done being your pawn. She slammed the communicator into the wall, shattering it into useless shards. Then she turned to Jax, who was staring at her like she had grown a second head. Get us out of here, she said. Jax didn't argue. He gunned the engines and the cruiser blasted skyward, weaving through the descending authority ships with Kale guiding their evasive maneuvers. Explosions rattled the hull. Zara barely noticed. Her mind was spinning, replaying every conversation, every comforting lie, every carefully orchestrated moment of her life. How much of it had been real? How much had been designed to lead her to this point? Kale stood beside her, a grim sentinel. He did not gloat. He did not say, "I told you so." In his silence, Zara found a strange comfort. When they finally broke through the blockade and surged into the safety of hyperspace, Jax let out a shaky breath. "Okay," he said. "Now would be a really good time to tell me what the hell is going on." Zara slumped into the nearest seat, feeling the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her shoulders. "My mother," she said slowly, "was part of a secret council on Earth. They knew about Kale. About the vault. About the ghosts. They knew and they planned to use them." Jax frowned. "Use them how? As weapons?" Kale answered before Zara could. "Not weapons. Rulers. Fear is the purest tool of governance. They sought to control the living with the terror of the dead." Zara shivered. "And I was the key. Because of my bloodline. Because I'm connected to Kale somehow." She remembered what Kale had said on the Raider's ship. "You carry my blood. You carry my curse." Jax whistled low. "Damn. And I thought my family reunions were bad." Zara let out a short, bitter laugh. "I'm not sure it's a reunion if everyone's trying to kill you." They rode in silence for a while after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Kale drifted to the front of the ship, staring out at the streaks of light passing through hyperspace. Zara watched him, feeling a pull she didn't understand. There was more to this bond between them than she had admitted, even to herself. It wasn't just a curse. It was something deeper. Something ancient. Finally, she stood and walked over to him. "What happens now?" she asked. Kale turned to her, his face shadowed and strange. "Now you choose." "Choose what?" "Choose whether you will be their weapon, or their destruction." Zara thought about Earth Authority. About the Council. About her mother's cold voice demanding obedience. About the billions of ordinary people who would have no idea they were being ruled by the dead. She thought about Kale, once a general, now a ghost, still fighting a war that had never really ended. She thought about herself. "I'm not a weapon," she said. "And I'm not their puppet." Kale inclined his head, almost respectful. "Then you must break them." Zara nodded slowly. For the first time, she felt like she understood what needed to be done. Not just survival. Not just escape. Revolution. They wouldn't see her coming. They thought she was still the scared, obedient daughter. They thought she would kneel. They were wrong. "We're going back to Earth," Zara said, turning to Jax. "We're going to burn it all down." Jax groaned. "I knew you were going to say that." Kale smiled, a fierce, terrible thing. And for the first time in her life, Zara smiled too. They had no idea what was coming. But they would soon. Very soon. Earth glittered in the distance like a poisoned jewel, beautiful from afar but rotten at its core. Zara watched it from the viewport of the cruiser, her reflection superimposed over the blue and green sphere. She felt no awe, no homesickness. Only a cold, focused rage. Beside her, Kale stood motionless, a ghost contemplating the living world he had once bled for. Jax hovered near the controls, visibly sweating as he prepared for a maneuver that was almost certainly going to get them all killed. The plan was suicide. Zara knew it. Jax knew it. Even Kale, who welcomed death like an old friend, knew it. And still, they moved forward, because there was no future in running. Their ship dropped out of hyperspace right on top of Earth's orbital security grid. Alarms screamed instantly. Defense satellites pivoted, locking onto them with mechanical precision. Jax whooped in panic and punched the thrusters, corkscrewing through space as beams of energy lanced past them. Kale moved forward, his hands raised, whispering ancient words that twisted reality around them. For a few precious seconds, sensors scrambled and Earth's mighty defenses blinked and hesitated. It was just enough. Jax rammed them through a hole in the blockade, engines screaming in protest, and they plunged into Earth's atmosphere, a fiery comet that sent emergency warnings echoing across every major city. They aimed straight for New Geneva, Earth's new capital, the shining seat of the Secret Council's power. As they descended, Zara could see the glittering towers, the marble plazas, the pristine streets filled with citizens who had no idea they lived under invisible chains. She clenched her fists, feeling Kale's power thrumming in her bones. She was the key. She was the weapon. But she would not be used. Not by her mother. Not by anyone. The cruiser slammed into the heart of the city with a bone-shattering crash, skidding through the marble plaza in front of the Earth Assembly Hall. Crowds scattered, screaming. Security bots and soldiers surged forward, weapons drawn. Zara staggered from the wreckage, coughing, blood dripping from a cut above her eye. Jax stumbled out after her, still cursing and clutching a smoking panel. Kale rose behind them, his form towering, solidifying into a nightmare vision of war and vengeance. The assembly doors burst open and Eliana Greaves strode out, flanked by counselors and armored guards. She was immaculate as ever, not a hair out of place, her face carved from stone. She raised a hand and the soldiers halted, their weapons still trained on Zara. "You've made this far harder than it needed to be," Eliana said, her voice coldly amplified through public channels. "Come quietly, Zara. We can still fix this. We can still make you whole." Zara laughed, a raw and broken sound. "You don't want me whole. You want me hollow. You want me empty enough to be your weapon." Eliana's expression flickered, just for a second, before smoothing into diplomat perfect neutrality. The council behind her shifted uneasily. They had not expected a public confrontation. They had certainly not expected the ghost army materializing around Zara, dark spirits flickering into existence with the scent of burning ozone and blood. Citizens screamed and fled. Cameras hovered in the air, broadcasting the scene live to billions. There would be no burying this. Jax leaned close, whispering, Not to rush you or anything, but we're about 30 seconds from a full military lockdown." Zara nodded grimly. She stepped forward, raising her voice, making sure every camera, every comm, every ear heard her. "I am Zara Greaves, daughter of Earth, born of blood and bound to truth. And I declare the Earth Assembly corrupt beyond redemption. I call for its dissolution under ancient law." The ground shook. Kale's army knelt around her, a sea of spectral warriors awaiting command. The guards hesitated, caught between orders and terror. The counselors whispered among themselves, some already backing away. Only Eliana stood firm, her face a mask of fury and desperation. "You don't understand what you're doing," Eliana hissed. "Without us, there will be chaos. Fear. Death. There already is," Zara said. "You just buried it under lies." For a moment, silence reigned. Zara could feel the weight of history tilting, the fragile tension between rebellion and ruin. Kale turned to her, his voice low. "It is time. Choose." Zara knew she could unleash the ghosts fully, tear down the assembly, slaughter every last corrupt official. It would be easy. It would be justice. It would also be exactly what they expected. A weapon out of control. Proof that their fear was justified. She took a deep breath, forcing down the storm inside her. "No," she said aloud. "There's a better way." She stepped toward her mother, unarmed, unshielded. The ghosts recoiled in confusion, unsure. Kale tensed, uncertain. "You taught me diplomacy," Zara said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You taught me that words can be sharper than blades. So here's my word." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device, a data spike Jax had cobbled together during their flight. She slammed it into the assembly's public comm relay. Files flashed into existence on every screen, Every comm line, every device on Earth. Secret Council records. Vault schematics. Ghost experimentation programs. Proof beyond denial. Truth. The crowd, still watching from a safe distance, gasped collectively as the information flooded out. Soldiers lowered their weapons. Counselors began to scream. Some tried to run. Citizens surged forward, no longer fleeing but charging, rage and betrayal in their eyes. Eliana's face crumbled. Not into fear. Into grief. You were meant for so much more, she whispered. I am, Zara said. Just not what you wanted. Kale moved beside her, watching the chaos unfold with something almost like satisfaction. But even he seemed surprised when Zara turned to him and smiled sadly. Thank you, she said. But it's time for you to rest too. Before Kale could react, Zara lifted a second device. An ancient binding artifact, re-engineered by Jax in secret. It flared to life, a vortex of energy pulling Kale and his army inward. The ghost soldiers roared in protest, but Kale met Zara's eyes and, after a long, terrible moment, nodded once. He let go. The spirits vanished, leaving only silence and smoke. Jax rushed to Zara's side, panting, grinning wildly. You did it, he said. You crazy, insane genius, you actually did it. Zara looked around at the ruins of the assembly, the crumbling council, the furious, awakened people. No, she said softly. We all did. Later, as the dust settled and the first seeds of a new government took root, Zara and Jax boarded a borrowed ship, heading out toward the stars. There would be no medals. No parades. Only the satisfaction of knowing she had broken the cycle. And the quiet certainty that somewhere out there, Kale watched, no longer as a curse, but as a guardian. As the ship soared into the endless black, Zara leaned back in her chair, smiled faintly, and said, Next time, maybe a vacation planet. Jax groaned. No haunted artifacts. No ancient ghosts. Just beaches. Please. Zara laughed, and the stars swallowed them whole. The war was over. For now.